for lateness. Yes, we'll just keep it. So I move the council accepts the apology from Councillor Wiley and the others for lateness, seconded by Councillor Lucas. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried.
Your Worship, is it really appropriate to accept apologies from people that actually haven't made them?
Well,
assumptive apologies, I think, represent a bit of a difficulty in terms of process.
I'm not sure about that. I'll ask the Chief from GSOs for a discussion on that, a ruling on that.
Unless the staff have been told, or yourself or another councillor has been told, then no, it shouldn't be accepted just from implicit.
Okay, well, that's a good point, Councillor. And so we'll have only an apology from... do you have anything to say about being late, Councillor O'Malley?
Caught in traffic.
Yes. So, would you like
that was last night. I spent an hour on Lee Saddle getting to Waitati.
Yes, would you like
I was out on council business till 9 o'clock last night too, Your Worship.
Yes, but would you like that to be considered as an apology?
I'm 2 minutes late.
Yes. Thank you. So I move that we accept the apology for absence from Councillor Wiley and apology for lateness from Councillor O'Malley. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Lucas. So they're corrected apologies. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. So I think that, well, to be fair, I think that's a useful point going forward. So that issue resolved. Declarations of interest. So we have the declarations of interest register. Are there any changes or updates? No. Therefore, I move that the council notes the members' interest register as attached, confirms the proposed management plan for elected members' interest. Seconded Councillor Ackland. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Now, the reports. Item number 4, the annual report for the year ending 30th of June 2022. Chief Graham, Mr. Logie is here, and Mr. Warren Allen, the Chair of Audit and Risk, is attending via Zoom. So, I'm sure they'll be keen to respond to any questions, but would you like to speak to the report, Mr. Logie?
Just a couple of things, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, the annual report is late. The statutory deadline is 31st of December for the FY22 financial year. In the report, we've made a comment on it that primarily it's due to additional audit work required on the 3 waters valuation and the additional work in relation to compliance with the drinking water standards. The Auditor General's Office issued a request that we get that audited. It hadn't been audited during the year, so that we had to engage a third party to complete auditing of the compliance with the water standards, which obviously took additional time to complete, particularly because all councils had to do it, so therefore there was some stretch in terms of the resource that was delivering that service. But what we'll do is Mr. Allen will just maybe provide some context in terms of the wider sector. So my understanding is there is at least 25 councils that still haven't completed their annual report for the year ending June 22. So Mr. Allen will be able to provide some context on that.
And any other comments from Chief Grant?
I'll let Mr. Allen
yes.
talk to this point.
And Mr. Allen, you have some comments?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and good morning, councillors. I truly appreciate this opportunity to raise just 2 points with you, and as the CFO has indicated, I would just like to cover off the reasons that certainly I see as to cause the lateness of you approving the annual report for 30th of June 22, and also to indicate how this is not a Dunedin City Council issue alone. As the CFO has said, there are many councils throughout the country that are still trying to finalise their annual report for June 22. As the CFO indicated, many councils have taken the opportunity as we move forward into Three Waters reform to re-examine the way that they value their Three Waters infrastructure. Last year, the Dunedin City Council decided that it was time to involve external valuers to look at the infrastructure for Three Waters and to adopt what can probably be described as a more modern approach to the valuation of those assets. Now, it's important, really important, to sort of point out and understand that this is a very judgmental, very subjective area. And also, as the CFO has pointed out, this required quite a bit of additional effort by Audit New Zealand. And they insisted on the initial valuation by the external experts being peer reviewed. And Audit New Zealand, because it does the audits of the majority of the sector in New Zealand, was of the view that some of the key judgment areas, and particularly for DCC, the loading that the valuers put onto the valuation in relation to the depth of the pipes and the steepness of the terrain was a little bit different than what they'd seen in other parts of the country. So the peer reviewer that was appointed looked at those particular adjustments and had a different view, which saw the valuation sort of reduce somewhat. So this all took quite a considerable time, as you can imagine, and also the second point was that Audit New Zealand were experiencing a quite significant resource issue, and therefore it took them quite a bit of time to allocate the resource to this additional work. Also, as the Chief Financial Officer has pointed out, there was considerable attention to the quality of the drinking water. Again, this was a sector issue. Again, there were some changes during the year in terms of processes and policies, and this caused some difficulty for the auditors in enabling them to do their work and come to a view across the entire year. It's interesting to note that what was reported in the statement of service performance for DCC was a lower percentage of compliance than what actually was being achieved. But because the auditors were unable to undertake some procedures to get comfort, if you like, across the entire year, that gave rise to some additional work and also a mention in their audit report. Mr. Mayor, the final point that I would like to make is that it has been a challenging year for the team, but the management finance team has done a great job. We at the Audit and Risk Committee have sort of drilled down and followed this process every step of the way, and albeit late, this exercise was going to have to be done at some point anyway, leading up to the Three Waters reform. And as I say, it's happened, if you like, a perfect storm where the valuation industry were really challenged to do this work. The external auditors and Audit New Zealand were really challenged to do this work. But the annual report in front of Council for approval today, certainly in my personal opinion, is a very good reflection of the asset valuations and the financial position and the service performance position of the Council as at June 2022. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Are you happy to take questions? And likewise, Mr. Looney. Are there any questions? Councillor O'Malley.
I don't know whether it's to Mr. Logo or to Mr. Allen, but when the external auditor was looking at our valuation of the three waters and found them to be unusually high, did they come and look at our system, or was it just a comparison of the valuations in other cities?
It was a combination of probably of those, plus also their understanding of valuations, that the work that they do, and understanding of the costs of doing the work. So certainly the initial valuation was based on some data that probably was too finite, and it needed to be expanded to look at total renewals rather than just a very specific group of renewals. And those renewals that they looked at in terms of the relative cost were relatively expensive renewals, so it wasn't reflective of the whole network.
Like the renewals that are going on right now. I mean, if you go to the end of Falloor Street, I think it's probably down to 4 metres down to the three water system down there. So my question really was, if it was a topography and layout question, how much was that examined in enough detail to basically come up with the two interpretations?
So I think the depth is relatively, it's in line with what we thought it was. It's more what they applied it, what they call a terrain factor, and the terrain factor that was applied to the original valuation was a threefold, and they felt that that was too high. And when we looked on reflection, it probably was. So we dropped that back to 2. Yeah.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My first question is just related to the increase in the assets. I see that it's gone at $871 million, 22%. And is that all about Three Waters increase, or are there other increases across the council owners?
So the main assets we value on an annual basis are the transport assets and the Three Waters. So I think around 600 million is Three Waters, and the balance will be roading.
And I have another question just around this is, I guess, around more about the ROS surveys, and some of the KPIs came pretty close, within 2 or 3%, and some of them have put not achieved. And I just wondered whether staff are given the flexibility to use that margin of error in favour, because some of them were really close, like within 1%.
At the moment, there is no margin of error, and I think in the work that we're doing for the 10-year plan around both levels of service and the measures, that's something we need to think about.
Yeah, I just noted the ROS surveys, the margin of error is about 3%, which really, so you don't allow that flexibility? Or
It's not currently allowed, but again, I think it's a point that we need to consider when we redo that, because you're absolutely right. Some of those, and a good number of them, fall within the margin of error, and they would be achieved otherwise.
Councillor Mayhem.
I'm sure we've covered this before, but can you remind me why the Waipori Fund performed low, the return for the year of minus 4.5? I know it's current market conditions, but what exactly?
Again, it's reflective of the market conditions, bearing in mind that we provide quarterly reporting, and generally we tend to perform above the benchmark for the investments. So, but yeah, it's a reflection of the market.
Councillor Walker.
Can you just remind us that the basis of the Waipori Fund is a long-term investment?
That's correct.
Councillor O'Malley.
On the top of page 33, we talk about the DCC established a Treaty of Waitangi partner governance role with Mana Whenua to provide strategic guidance to our assistance planning program. Where does that sit? And how does outcomes from that guidance come back so that it's seen by us? Healthy city with reliable water quality and wastewater storm is the header. Actually, I guess, can anybody tell me exactly what that is?
If you pause, and Mr. Drew can't be here, but he is watching, so I'll get an update from him.
could be quite a long pause. We have no. Does anyone else have a question? Deputy Mayor Barker.
I can fill in with one of curiosity. On page, I have a lot of questions, but they're not really that relevant for this. The waste minimisation reserve, there's a chunk of money sitting in there, and I just wondered an explanation about that. Is some of that development contributions, or is it just sitting there because it's, I don't understand why there's a reserve?
So my understanding is that's the waste levy. So it's the waste levy that we haven't spent, so we put it into reserve until such time as we spend it. So it's not development contributions.
Okay, so all of that list of all of that money in reserves, it's just like a little bank account, or are there different forms of reserve money?
No, there's different forms of reserve money. For example, if somebody gives us a bequest for a particular thing and we haven't spent it, we stick it in the reserve until such time as we spend it. So it's recognising that that money is tagged and we can't use it for anything other than the required purpose. So that's what most of those reserves are. There's the odd development contribution through those reserves, and as we spend the money, we go through and tidy them up.
Councillor Gilbert.
Thank you. On those reserves, just after conversations we've had over the last sort of week or so, there is one in there for Aviary Bird Fund Operations Reserve. Can you do you have any more specifics on what is at the Botanical Gardens aviary specifically? And if, for example, hypothetically speaking, that aviary were to end up being used for another purpose, what would happen to that?
Through the chair, I don't have intimate knowledge of the particular reserves. I would say because it is the aviary, it will be the BG aviary, but actually the purpose of why that reserve is tagged, I couldn't tell you, so we can certainly have a look at that.
Are there any further questions? Councillor O'Malley.
The answer to mine is not affecting my ability to make a determination, so it does. We do not need to hold the meeting up for it.
I would say Mr. Drew is typing back, but I think he's the slowest texter in creation, and so I will have you something in a minute.
Deputy Mayor Barker.
I just want to understand a little bit more about the benchmarks. They are pages 188 to 191, and I see that some of them are green and some of them are orange. So is this something that is required by the audit? I see it's in the disclosure statement, but I actually hadn't looked at them in depth before. I've got a few ticks beside them and some question marks for understanding what they actually mean. So would you be able to just enlighten us a little bit more about the whether they're a regulatory, illegal, or how we perform in them?
So these are a legal requirement to include these. Again, it comes back to you talked about the margins on some of the ROS things. The margins of these are there's no tolerance. So, for example, if you look at the rates one, because when we set the rates, we set it based on the property database at a point in time. Invariably, between that point in time and the 30th of June, there are additional properties added in, which means that when we charge the rates, we end up with slightly higher rates than what was in the budget. Therefore, you get a brown tick. So that's the nature of those. But they are regulatory. Normally, I think the majority of them are set by DIA.
Okay, we have an answer from Mr. Drew.
I have an answer. So it's referencing project level governance at the moment that's sitting with Okaha, and it's developing options that will feed through for council to consider as part of the 10-year plan process around basically system planning.
So we'll hear back from that outcome for the 10-year plan, I guess was my question, yeah.
Yes, and you'll get a range of options and then council will determine where it wants to head.
Excellent. So at this stage, I'll move that we approve the annual report for the financial year ending 30th of June, and there's a range of other resolutions. Seconded Councillor Walker, and expect that we'll have resolutions. Thank you, gentlemen, for your commentary. Thank you, Mr. Allen, for being with us this morning. It's much appreciated, and I think we'll get the resolutions on screen soon enough, but they're also written in your agendas. And we have a seconder. So, do we have? I'd just like to say that this, of course, is a retrospective report from 30th of June last year, so it's taken a wee while to get here, but It is what it is. And so we have not had a great deal of questions about it, and nothing of major substance has appeared at this point. So I take comfort from that there is no disagreement around the table in particular about it as a statement of record. So I invite your discussion on the matter now. Who are my speakers? Councillor Vandevers.
I agree with our Chair of Audit and Risk, Mr Warren Allen, that it is a very good reflection of the DCC financial position as at June 2022. However, being an accurate or good reflection does not make it a good result. In fact, I believe that there is a great deal to be alarmed by in this report. I cannot agree with the Mayor when he opens in his last line by saying that overall it has been a very busy year of solid progress and upgrades, which sees us placed to seize opportunities and meet the challenges ahead. If you look at page 27 and you look at term loans from the consolidated financial results, they are now budgeted for $1 billion, listed here at 891 million. And when you look at things like term loans as a percentage of, these figures are something that keep cropping up more often sometimes than the actual term loans themselves. And as a percentage of total assets, for instance, 15% seems like not that bad. But when you take, again, Mr Warren Allen's comment on asset valuation as being very judgmental and very subjective, and you note that, for instance, our Three Waters valuation dropped from some 2.4 billion down to 1.6, then you realise that the term loans as a percentage of assets doesn't really give you the reassurance that you might imagine, and that what we need to look at is the absolute debt and term loans that we have, and also particularly look at the trend of those term loans. And if we go to page 26 and we look at the term loans as they've moved over the last 5 years from 2018, we see there was a 22 million uplift that year. The next year there was a $23 million uplift in debt. The next year there's a $28 million uplift in debt. The next year there's a $63 million uplift in debt. And the next item is going to give us some even more eye-watering trend detail. I can vote for this because I believe it is accurate, but I have to say that I think the asset values in here, debt as a percentage, all of these other figures in here, which some might take to be reassuring and somehow okay, I don't see that way at all. To me, there are strong alarm bells ringing here. We need to hear them, and we need to recognise that what we have done as a council over the last 5 years has been unsustainable, and that what we continue to do is unsustainable in the face of the biggest rise in interest rates in many generations. And that rise continuing to rise now. The official cash rate, I think, recently up to 5.25%, and a prediction that it will go up again by 50 basis points before the end of the year. So there's a lot to be seriously concerned about here, and I look forward to speaking to it more, particularly in the next item.
Deputy Mayor Barker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. First of all, I'd like to thank to the leadership and the staff for their work during 21-22. It was a really tough time. We had COVID. We had 2 weeks of national lockdown. We had 3 weeks of Auckland lockdown and many weeks of varying levels in traffic lights. And I think we might have all tried to blank that from our mind. But it was a really, really tough time, and it had huge impacts on our institutions, the number of people going through, the satisfaction rating, and a huge impact on our staff. We all need, and ourselves, we all needed to learn how to do those Zooms, and be flexible and responsive and pivot every week as it seemed there was a new challenge and something new to understand. So this did deliver our impact on our ability to deliver our work programs and those numbers into our institutions, our art galleries, our museums, etc. The money that was coming into those and the ability to host our out-of-town visitors. And during that period, we also had a huge load of government reforms, and I think we all remember how many hours we spent on Three Waters, RMA and local government. In 2021-22, we look back now, it was a long time ago, it felt like blow after blow and such a lot on our plate. So although this annual report is 9 months old, it's a valuable document on to see where council can do better, the story of the promises that we made our community during the long-term plan and actually how we delivered on them. So I keep because I love a good spreadsheet of the annual plan or annual report, KPI achievements, just so I can see what trends are going on in the context. And I think there are a few interesting stats on the positive side. There was the highest number of buildings consented in 30 years. That's huge. Also, record number of dog registrations, over 18,000, and I recall that someone said there was 1,000 more dogs registered in Dunedin. 100% KPI achievement in property, noting that there were 10 new units built and 38 units refurbished. That's a great achievement. And I've used the margin of error because I think it was like at 1% to give 100% KPI achievement in stormwater. They did really, really well, and we're really improving on that. So when we talk about our capital spend, we are actually improving our roads, and I'm just going to talk about that. There was an increase of 14% achievement in the KPIs to roading and footpaths, noting that 45.5 K of roads were resealed and 26.5 K of footpaths. So we're achieving, and we are borrowing to do some of that capital work, but we are making a difference. There were 23 playgrounds that had new equipment, and we saw a decline in the a definite area for improvement in playgrounds, so we're working to deliver on that. The Dunedin City Holdings CCOs, 90% of their KPIs are achieved over the businesses, with 100% from DCHL itself, and the operation budget was delivered with a small surplus. Steady. The perception of Dunedin as one of the world's great small cities, and that's one of our top line things that we look at, is at 85%. 90% visited a cultural facility in the last year. That's really important because we invest a lot in those, and really important as well, because this is about life, was a 25% decrease in fatal or serious injury crashes. So overall, the KPI achievement was 41.5% of all measures. And I noticed, and I asked the chief about this, that a number of those fell within the ROS margin of error. So I think that they're actually pretty close to achieving, and also noting the huge effect that COVID had on everything. We've clearly seen some issues highlighted with level of service measurements. When I go through, I see that they don't really link with the strategies and what we're trying to achieve. So when I actually took that hat off and looked at them, I'm like, they are really confusing. So I'm really glad that we're doing some clear work on setting those levels of service expectations for the next long-term plan and trying to make sense of them, because it's really hard to ask our team to deliver on stuff that is confusing and not focused. So that is a great piece of work that we're going to be doing. The KPI achievement of the CCOs at 90% was stellar. We also need to look very hard at those, because it is about, bottom line, actually delivering value for the community and funding and money to, I won't say subsidise our rates, but we have $5.7 billion worth of assets, and we need to make them work hard for us all to deliver. So I just want to say thank you again to all of the council staff. It was a really, really tough year, and I know that, people got sick, we got sick, nearly everyone had COVID through that time, and it was really hard to try and get that delivery done. I know it seems like ancient history now, but it is part of our history. I hope we see a real bounce back. I think we're really set up for delivery in 22-23. We're halfway through that, nearly ready to write the next annual report, and great to see us getting our house in order with a clear focus on the levels of service and the increased delivery of capital projects. It's very clear that we've still got a lot of hard work to do, so I look forward to doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I always find myself talking about infrastructure when we're talking about money, and that's because the two are inextricably linked. The increased valuation that we've seen on our assets has come mostly around the revaluation of the three water assets, and as Mr Allen correctly points out, that was the use of an external sources this year to basically recheck on our systems. But it isn't just the last year's work, it's a culmination of at least 3 years of work on three waters in response to the government's initiatives, and we've come to the end of that. Probably, I know I can't get the statement out of the auditors, but it's trying to get a straight statement out of the auditors like trying to get a straight statement out of a statistician. It's difficult. But I would argue that we have basically taken a more conservative approach than most councils, and the one that is probably a true reflection of what we face. Now, that has meant that we have had a significant uptick in our capital works program, which is where the increase in the debt has come from. And you can't have it both ways. You can't turn around, you can't say that we're underinvesting in our hard assets and then turn around and say that when we start to invest in our hard assets, we've generated too much debt. I can't find it in this paper. It is here, but I can't re-find it for this speech. The most important component you have to think about is your interest charges against your rates, because that's effectively when you're assessing whether or not what you're doing is affordable. And those charges have gone up slightly as a percentage against rates, but I do believe they're still below 10%. So we are sitting inside the envelope in terms of where you should be safely, and we are achieving our outcomes when it comes to our obligations. And I really bring that up now because I want to bring it up again in public again. I would like us to be able to talk to the Minister of Local Government before Three Waters goes any further to show him what we have done to date. Now, that invitation has been out for a while, and I know it has made its way to his office, and I'm waiting for a reply, and I'm expecting that when we do get the reply, it will be yes, you can come. But more importantly, I'm wanting assurance that when we do go to see the Minister, that the actual information we give him is taken in and taken into account, because we have done the right thing, and that's showing up in these books right now. And yet, the government's charging ahead saying councils can't do the right thing. So those two statements, or our actions in that statement, are incompatible. So I'm really hoping that with these books going in, this is a proof again that we are doing the right thing. And in fact, the interim CE of the water service entity has come through Dunedin and seems to be quite happy with what he's seen, which again is consistent with what we're doing. So yes, we've taken on more debt. Yes, our assets have gone up. Of course, most of those assets are unrealisable. So it's really the rates that comes with it that is the important thing to consider. But I don't believe the city's in any particular danger at the moment, and I think that making those statements again gets in the way of us doing what we have to do. We have to look after our assets. They are by far and away the biggest component of what we do. If you take transport and Three Waters out of what we do, we've probably only got about 20% of our spend left after that, especially when it comes to capital. And all major works, all capital works, are usually funded by debt. The depreciation and replacement has to be funded in real time and should be sitting over in the OPEX, which is why if we have those assets next year, we would anticipate a rates increase to align with what we are defining in the annual plan coming up, which is obviously in next year's annual report, an unbalanced budget, which is based on the depreciation around those three waters. So a lot of these numbers changed around that depreciation change, that valuation change. And I just think that the city's in good condition, and I really think that we need to that message needs to get out ahead of the sky is falling, which can sometimes be the message which comes out. Thank you.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll be very brief. I don't want to repeat what other people have said. I agree with the two previous speakers, particularly the closing comments there from Kelly that the city is in no danger at the moment. In fact, it's in a good state. I think Mr. Allen's words were it's been a challenging year for the team, and that's fairly obvious. So I just want to put on record thanks to Mr. Logie and all the team and everyone involved in putting this together, actually. And I do take some heart from the fact that many councils throughout the country haven't yet gone through, completed this process. So I think that speaks volumes. I also just want to correct one piece of misinformation that was shouted out loud by Councillor Van der Vos when his words were, and it'll be on the record and recording, that we now have the highest interest rate in generations. Actually, after yesterday's OCR increase, It's the highest since December 2008, and I don't know about anybody else around this table. I don't consider 15 years generations. And the average interest rate has been 6.74% between 1985 and now. And I wasn't here in 1985, but I'm informed the interest rate then was 67%. Thank you.
I think we're done. We're almost done. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to the previous speakers. I do have some things that I want to say, and first of all, that it is an excellent account of what has happened during the 2021-22 year. And I take Councillor Barker's point about COVID, because I don't know about you, but it's a bit of a blur, really. And I continue to be astonished at what we managed to achieve during that time, and this is a good record of that. And reminder that it's the first year of the long-term plan. The capital delivery rate was stellar and has continued to be. And when I look through what happened during that time, I just want to pick out some things that resonated with me. Task Force Green, often hidden away in the background, 20,000 hours of voluntary work. I look at the level of grants, funding across the different grants, and the good that that did in our community. We had the first Matariki public holiday in Mana Moana. We had the record high new homes at 64. Code and all of the impact that that made. We signed off our St Clair, St Kilda coastal plan. We worked towards and started our Mosgiel pool, and we're now seeing that coming to fruition. We deepened our relationship with mana whenua and Matawaka, and Te Pai Māori was one of those outcomes, the Mana to Mana Forum. We set up the zero carbon work towards implementation, and many of these pieces of work started back in 21-22. We're now seeing the progress in those. They take time. Plan D campaign was mentioned and the success of that. Something that resonated with me was the Welcome for Students and Parents campaign, which was a new initiative, but one that I was pleased to see. The prayer and spiritual space in August 21, very important. Councillor Barker mentioned the housing, and School Street, as we know, is one of the most energy efficient types of housing, community housing in New Zealand. Railway station refurbishment, stage 1 was underway then, and look where we've got to now. More locally for me, Taironi, and the work that has gone on there, almost completed. The playgrounds, the George Street work started, and the continuing work on Peninsula Connection. And that's not all, there is so much more, but those ones resonated with me. We also identified the limits of the ROS survey, and that's work that's going on. In terms of the CCOs, the turning round of the ship of Aurora, and we see the progress that's been made on that. So it's a body of work that I am proud to say that we did. And I want to acknowledge my colleagues who were there at the time and the leadership of Mayor Hawkins in delivering that work. We've invested in our city, and in this report we see that. And we can't do that without debt. That is part of it. And I reiterate the comments made by Councillor Walker and Councillor O'Malley about the positive news story. It's very easy to turn this into an alarmist story, but it's not. So I want to acknowledge, as others have, the staff and the CEO's leadership in all of this. I know it's been a tough year for them. They have delivered, and for that we are very grateful.
Councillor Hulan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to add my voice to particularly what Councillor O'Malley said, is because I've had concerns for some time, is that we are investing a lot of money, we're doing all the right things, and, we're probably going to be penalised for it because of round three waters. And what I mean by that is that we're sitting there looking so much better than many of the smaller councils. And if this reform goes ahead the way they're proposing, will end up subsidising the smaller councils that haven't put in the investments that we have. And I don't think that's fair or reasonable. And I agree once again with what Councillor O'Malley said, that, you know, look, come and have a look at us. We are actually doing well. So the messaging that the government's going out saying that councils aren't doing well is unfair and incorrect in our situation. And that needs to be clarified, because there are a lot of councils, I'm sure, like us, but we can only talk for ourselves, that are doing really well. And, you know, Councillor Vandevers is concerned about debt, and he's correct. However, and I will say, when I heard, this morning, I was like, the 5.25 on the interest rate, it is shocking. There's no doubt about it. No one is happy with it. And even the commentators were saying that, you know, there was no need for it. So that increase will affect every single homeowner, and I'm clearly not very happy about it at all, and no one is. But Councillor Walker is correct. There have been times where interest rates have been way higher, but thankfully we haven't got the high rates of those times yet, and I hope that doesn't happen. But all of that impacts our budgets, and those are things that are external influences that we don't have control over. Three Waters and all the reforms are hitting our budgets big time. Once again, we don't have the control over it. It's the government that's doing that. The OCR is the Reserve Bank and the government, well, the Reserve Bank with OCR. But, you know, so all of those externals are affecting us. However, as everyone else has said here, we've just put our head down, we've consolidated, and we're working along to improve our assets. And I've certainly campaigned in the past, as many others have, to improve our infrastructure. And I think we can hold our head high and say we've certainly done that. And thank you to Mr. Logie and his team.
Councillor Mayhem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also would like to thank Mr. Logie and his team. As Warren Allen from Audit and Risk suggested, this was a perfect storm. The valuation of the Three Waters was timely leading into the reforms, all of the reforms that we've experienced. As Deputy Mayor Barker reminded us, we've just come out of COVID. I feel the report reflects our assets and our service performance. I'm impressed with the fact that we maintained roads, we achieved those housing goals, we renewed those assets. We insulated 80 homes in the city under the Cosy Homes Trust. We assisted 600 people in the city with their electrical bills. And we removed library charges, just little things that make it easier for people to live in the city. Internationally, we produced 43 films in this region. We renewed our Shanghai partnerships. That's business, science, academia and creative partnerships. I feel like we're meeting some of our strategic wellbeing goals for the city. Our Plan D campaign promoted us as a destination to the rest of the nation and to the world. I think that the snapshot report reflects the safe, accessible and connected city that we continue to look after for all of our residents. And again, I thank the staff. I feel comforted in the fact that there are 25 councils that have yet to complete their annual report, and unlike other councils, we are lucky enough to have the Waipori Fund, 100 million, and probably 300 million in forestry. That is the balance that we can fall back on those debts. We have that safety net, and that is, I feel personally, reassured. Thank you.
Councillor Lucas.
Thank you. As a councillor who was not around this table when this was achieved, I feel reassured that this is what we've inherited, or I've inherited, and I think audits, I guess, pedanticness and the qualifications is not concerning, especially when you look at the that one of them is where we've overachieved it. They can't prove that we've overachieved. I do think it is very pedantic. But I do think that this has provided us a very good platform as we go into our annual plan hearings next month, and as we look to set the long-term financial plan going forward, that we have all read this and hopefully have understood this, which is not exactly a very friendly kind of a document, but I think that there are many levels in their statement of service performance that I think that we need to look at. I mean, when people are asked whether they're satisfied, for example, with their rubbish collection, either it's collected or it's not. You know, you're satisfied with your water, you turn on the tap, either the water runs or not. I think we can do better, and I think it's very timely for us to consider this. And I think the staff, I guess Santa obviously passed on the parcel to Easter Bunny to deliver, and the staff can rest over the weekend having finally managed to deliver something that wasn't anything to do with them in reality for it to be so late. So I think well done to the staff for persevering and getting that over the line, and we should feel, as many councillors have said, very reassured that we have a good quality annual report.
Great. So in replying, I'd just like to make three simple points. Firstly, with 25 councils in a similar position to us being late, and 25 that still haven't done it yet, it's a third of the councils in New Zealand. It's more than a third. So this has been a consistent problem right through the country, and with getting getting accurate valuations and getting auditors to actually do the work. So it is quite a difficult task. So that's one. The other one is, of course, the extra debt that we're incurring due to the Three Waters assets improvement. And our ratepayers have been asking for quite some time, in particular since 2015, that our Three Water assets be improved. And so they've been looking for the improvements that we're making. And I think it's really important for us going into the Three Waters reform that the government has, got on the table, is working through, and hopefully modify them, that we have our assets in better condition, in as good a condition as possible, so that we're setting the city up for when some external party might take over the governance of those assets. Because I think taking the opposite course, which I believe some councils have done, is really setting those communities up for failure. I think it's really quite dangerous, because abdicating responsibility to somebody else to sort out problems, I think we're far better to be in the position we're in of we're taking a very proactive stance and advancing the work on our Three Waters assets, so that they're in as good a condition as possible, but also that it's the work that needs to be done is clearly identified and identifiable to whoever might be responsible for the governance of those in the future. And hopefully we still have a good stake in that, and that would be preferable going forward. But I think it's the responsible thing to do, to put things in as good a shape as possible, so that our community is not disadvantaged by someone else making decisions and not knowing the various areas of work and projects that need to be done. There's also the possibility that the debt that we've incurred in doing that will be repaid, will be transferred to the new entity, so that we will receive those funds back. And that is one of the hopes that on which we have proceeded. But nevertheless, I think it's still important to do that, to get ourselves in as good a position as possible. And lastly is that I'd like to thank all those people that have looked at all of the positive aspects and looked on the bright side of all of the things that happened over the last 3 years, because it has been a very trying time for the whole country, for our community as a whole, dealing with a pandemic. And thankfully we had a response such that not that many of our community suffered mortality changes because of that. So, and one of those particular things I'm particularly fascinated by is and pleased with, is the use of positive things that have happened, is the use of groins to trap sand on the beach at Te Raoni, which has now transformed that beach into a beautiful white, very popular resource for the community, for our whole community, but in particular those people living down the peninsula. So that's really good to see. Having said that, I should like to now put the motion by division, so that we approve the annual report, and there's parts A to F as shown. So we'll now take that by division.
Councillor Ackland. Aye. Councillor Barker.
Aye.
Councillor Benson Pope. Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Gilbert.
Aye.
Councillor Houlihan. Councillor Lucas.
Aye.
Councillor Mayhem.
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis.
Yes.
Councillor Walker. Councillor Weatherall.
Aye.
Mayor Raddick.
Aye.
Carried unanimously.
Thank you. And now moving on to item 5, the debt drawdown. Mr. Logie and Ms. Graham will speak to the report, perhaps. Any commentary?
Maybe Mr. Logie might just update on the Three Waters meeting yesterday.
Okay, so yesterday we met with some representatives from DIA. The primary purpose of the meeting was to confirm the debt at 30 June 22 that relates to Three Waters. So the figure, I think in April I said the figure would be 120 million. It actually ended up at 120.9 million. So what we've done is, in principle, they've agreed that. We've got to provide some evidence of how we've calculated it, but on the face of it, they seem to think that that's a number that's acceptable. So on that basis, we will be able to fix the starting point. And then subsequent to that, what the DIA will do is use our debt figures that appear in the FIS statements, which what we've referenced through the annual plan process, as the basis for the debt that will transfer to the new entity. So assuming we get approval to increase the debt by the 35 million today, what we will then do is go to DIA and present the position of Three Waters for the current year to get approval that they're okay, that we can increase the accelerated program for the CapEx. Again, the indications verbally are that would be approved, but obviously you still need to go and get the approval. But I can't do that, or we can't do that until you've approved the additional debt limit. So once we've done that, we'll do that work. In terms of the 23-24 year, the DIA will, as part of the significance process, approve our annual plan or sign off our annual plan, and then that will form the basis of any debt for the subsequent year. Other than that, we're happy to take questions.
Yes, excellent. Thank you, Mr. Logie. Questions? Deputy Mayor Barker?
So is DIA signing off part of the Three Waters? I remember we were quite concerned that DIA would be able to sign off the work that we plan to do, and is this a consequence of what the government has decided?
I'll have to check the legislation, but there are some things that trigger significance in the Water Services Bill Act, and significance is defined differently. So the drawing down of debt is one of it. So not necessarily the program of work that we're doing, but the cost of it is what they're interested in. Does that make sense?
I'm sorry. I think it makes sense. I'm just and then I was just listening to the DIA signing off on the annual plan, and I was just concerned about their capacity, given 9 months on the auditing.
And not necessarily the whole annual plan, but the elements of the annual plan that relate to Three Waters. And I spoke to the head of the transition unit this week, and their turnaround times for these things are pretty quick, usually within a week.
Excellent. Councillor Vandervis?
Thank you, Your Worship. The debt drawdown item 5, is that the reason for this extraordinary meeting, or is it the item 4 that was the reason for the extraordinary meeting?
Initially it was the annual report, but this item had to come to council, and it made sense to bring it today.
Bearing in mind that we had flagged it at the last Finance and CCO committee meeting that we would come to council with this request.
Thank you. The recommendations, B notes, this is on page 237, notes that this is an additional 35 million of debt to the 22-23 year. What is it additional to?
to the original approved debt as part of the annual plan of 445.
And in C, it says that that we're to note that the capital budget for the 23-24 year is being recast to sustainable levels and in line with the 10-year plan 21 to 31. Does that mean that prior to being recast, we have a budget that is not sustainable?
So when we did the annual plan for the current year, I think we indicated a capital spend. So we did the 3 years. We did the prior year, this year, and then next year we indicated a spend of $200 million. Based on the current environment, that is probably not sustainable for lots of reasons, in terms of including financing, but also capability, the ability for us to deliver at that level at a sustainable pace, in terms of both our contractors and our own staff. So we're of the view that we need to bring that capital spend back to more in line with the 10-year plan.
Councillor Gary.
Just playing the devil's advocate, what would be the consequence of us not signing this off, voting yes?
I think next week I have to pay wages, including paying councillors' remuneration. Effectively, if this is not approved, then at some point in the next 2 or 3 months we would not be able to pay our bills, basically.
Councillor Hulet.
Thank you. What's, you know, when you go to DIA for the to get the debt recovery, what amount are we likely to be asking for?
Again, what we'll do is we'll do this year, and then obviously when council approve the annual plan, then that will form the basis of the subsequent year. But
so from this plan, from our this annual plan, obviously it is out of date now, but will we carry some of that debt over to the other plan as well that we'll be asking for?
I think I'll try. So for the last year, $120.9 million of debt will go, which is, and then once we've got to the end of this financial year, we'll work out how much debt is associated with the Three Waters assets. It's roundabout, I don't know, 180. Yeah, so there'll be another 60 million that will go, and then again at the end of the next year, depending on where we get to with the annual plan, it'll be whatever attaches to the Three Waters assets. So at this stage, all the indications are that the DIA will take all of the debt that is identified with Three Waters assets if those assets end up transferring to a new entity.
Excellent. Councillor Melly.
It's going to relate to my speech. What is our current Standard & Poor's rating? A minus?
Yeah, it's whatever it was last year. I can't remember the exact AA something, but it's obviously one below the government because we can't have the same credit rating as the government. So it's still very positive.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you. Just a question of curiosity. Just considering the current fiscal environment nationally and internationally, are you aware of any other TAs that are in a similar position in terms of the financial pressure to add in the way we're being asked to?
I think from discussions it appears that lots of councils are still struggling to deliver the capital program. We're probably one of the few councils that are delivering actually over and above our capital program. I still think most TAs are struggling.
That's the feedback I've had from fellow chief executives and from discussions with the DIA. The situation we find ourselves in is not common throughout the country, in that we are over-delivering on our capital program.
So, in essence, we're very much victims of our own success in some ways.
I wouldn't characterise it like that. I think that, we are delivering at a level that we think is greater than we realistically thought we could. And in response to Councillor Van der Vis's question around sustainability. Mr. Logie, that was we do need to recast because partly our level of delivery is driving some inflationary pressures as well in the local community. And so we just need to those levers for the upcoming capital program.
Councillor Vincent.
Thank you. That back one question to the comment that was made about capacity to deliver and our situation being a bit unusual. Is that because of the capacity of the industry to actually meet our expectations?
If councillors recall, it's taken us a few years, probably 3 years, to start to create that pipeline of work. And historically we have delivered, planned, delivered, and then had a downtime for planning. We spent a couple of years planning and we've got that constant pipeline of work. Other councils haven't quite gotten there yet, and so they're still in that very lumpy cycle of workflow.
Sorry, just for the sake of completeness though, part of the issue or the reason we are different is not just the fact that our planning has been more slick than elsewhere, but it relates also to the capacity of the industry to deliver on the demands that we are putting on for this sort of work?
So we have good capacity. We have deliberately built up capacity in the city and brought in new players, Isaac's being one of them, in the area. So we don't have a problem with just in that way, although there are some of our contractors are struggling to get people now, which does jack up the price a little bit. We often only have one outfit tendering, but broadly we don't have a capacity issue.
Councillor O'Malley.
Just following up that question, it's my feeling that, and just correct me if I'm wrong, that a lot of this has come out of work came out of the project management office and the initiative that was started 2 years ago, I think, that where we did the 7-year contracts for renewal, so that industry could in fact, am I correct in saying the industry could in fact meet our demands because they had surety going forward?
So our changed approach to procurement has provided that surety to the market, but also part of it was this council taking the decision about 2 years ago to invest in the planning work, and taking that approach means that we now have a really solid plan of work that we can tweak to meet the industry capacity.
Councillor Vandervis.
Getting back to the additional 35 million and what it's additional to, you've said it's additional to the 445 million that was already budgeted. That 445, as I see it, is a 111 million increase on the 22 figure. Is that how you see it as well?
I don't have access, but it's around the 100 million mark, yes.
So that given that that we already increased the debt by $111 million, we are now actually, if we approve this, going to be increasing it by 146 million. That's 111 plus the 35 that we're now contemplating. And I recognise that this is a debt ceiling and that there's 9.5 million of wriggle room involved in it. But given your comment about, what would happen if we don't do it and we're not going to be able to pay people, that strongly suggests to me that the majority of this 35 million will be spent, and that we are adding not just 35 million, but compared to the 2022, we're adding $146 million to the debt. Am I correct in that?
Yes, we are adding to the debt. I mean, we have indicated through the financial reporting since October that the capital delivery is running ahead of budget, so this is a result of that.
Councillor Walker.
I should know this figure, but I'm sure it's not embedded in everybody's heads, but it will be yours. Where do we currently Where do we currently sit with regards to our 250% of revenue figure?
So this uplift will take us to around this sort of 145 to 150%.
Sorry, based on other councils and the requirement to sit within that ceiling, that sits fairly well amongst, in terms of averages of other TOs? So
just to remind councillors that the 250% is set in the financial strategy. It's set by this council. We look at gross debt over revenue. We do not. A lot of the sector also look at offsetting their financial assets that sit against that. So if we were to do that, then you would look at, say, well, the Waipori Fund is a financial asset that could technically offset that. There is an argument to say the investment property portfolio is similar at $100 million.
Alrighty, I think, Councillor Leland, you have a question? Yes.
The figures before won't, because the Councillor Vandervis raised, didn't you mention previously prior to that we're hoping to get maybe just over 300 million, around that 129 and 189, I think, from DIA around the debt. Is that correct? Or am I misunderstood that?
No, currently, as I said before, at this stage we are just confirming the debt for June 22, which is the 120.9. We'll get that confirmed. Then subsequent to any decision in this state, we will then go and deal with the current year, and then the annual plan will be the subsequent year.
And just to clarify, we're not getting that money from the DIA. That debt will transfer off the balance sheet.
That will lower the debt levels, won't it? So the concern about the high debt levels, they will come down with that, you know, as long as they follow through with what they've said they will do. Yeah. Some people will, and I'm sitting here wondering it myself, but I just want to know, obviously as a council we made the decision to move forward with the infrastructure work, but I am just thinking that ratepayers might wonder this, because I'm wondering it myself, is it a case now that councils that haven't done the work will then have the government come in and do all that work for them, and, you know, I'm not sure what their debt levels will end up being, but I'm just wondering where the fairness is for, you know, councils like us that have gone ahead and done that, but how, if we're compensated in any way for the fact that we've, you know, what are the benefits of us doing it? I'm just trying to justify that in my own mind, really, I suppose, because it looks like the others are going to get their infrastructure fixed by this new entity if it moves forward, and we'll probably be asked to subsidise it. What benefits are there? And, you know, obviously we've got a better infrastructure system, and so the others will have to wait for theirs to be done. So that's the main benefit, is it? And is there, you know, well, my question is... Can I
make I think I'd like to make a comment on that, Councillor. Can I just make a comment, and then you can tell me if I'm correct in my assessment, looking at it in the overview. We're spending quite a lot of money on Three Waters in this financial year, and a good chunk of that will be most of the money that we're spending on upgrading our Three Waters assets will be financed by debt, and we need another 35 million to make a total of 60 million that we will be spending on Three Waters debt. However, given that the DIA have agreed at their current debt is 120 million as of June 22, it looks highly likely, one can't guarantee these things, but we spend $60 million in increasing our debt levels for Three Waters, but also improving our assets. We're actually doing the work ourselves, so it's actually done, and we will get that debt transferred off our balance sheet. What that will mean is that our debt levels will go to 480 million by the end of this year, and 180 million of that debt will get transferred to the Three Waters department or entity, whatever, you know, that still as yet nebulous thing. So our debt levels will then come back down. And the thing that we're doing by spending this money on Three Waters right now and funding it through debt is to make sure that our community is in the best possible condition going forward into this new regime. Because, and now to get off piste slightly, what we have seen with certain government entities, especially when they are restructured, is that the first thing that happens is budget cuts. And therefore, our assets might be trimmed, our asset renewals and improvement program, CapEx spend, might well be trimmed, and to leave us in a poorer position and much worse off, just as we have seen, just as we are seeing currently in other areas of centralisation of government activity. Does that fit with your view of things, Mr. Logie?
The money bit's fine.
Deputy Mayor Barker.
Just a question of clarification. When the debt goes, the asset goes as well. Is that correct?
In terms of Three Waters, that would be what happens, yes. The timing of the debt will be dependent. So there is, if the legislation does have it doesn't necessarily say that we will get the money on day one. There is a period, I think there's a 5-year period where the debt can be drawn down. However, we have indicated, and a lot of that's to do with some of the councils won't want the money because their loans don't fall due on the 1st of July 24. If their loan doesn't fall due till 2 years later, then they don't necessarily want the money now. What we have indicated at this stage is that our preference, based on our borrowing profile, is that we would probably want the money on day one.
Okay, I guess my question around the assets going as well, and I cannot remember the value of the assets, Councillor O'Malley is probably better at that, but I guess it affects our debt to asset loan ratio. Is that a concern today, or is that something that we will be concerned about in the long-term plan?
Again, just a reminder, we look at debt over revenue rather than debt over assets because it's the revenue that provides the ability for us to pay the interest.
Councillor Walker, did you have another question? No. We're all, okay. Councillor O'Malley.
It's only partially related to this, but it is important. It will be my speech. How much revenue as a percentage of our total revenue intake does Three Waters give us? Because that then reflects, and am I correct in saying that, let's say it's 30%, because I think it's around that. Yeah, I knew it was roughly like that. Does that mean our ceiling then would go down by 30% as well, 33% as well, once that revenue's out? Thank you.
Alrighty, I think we're done with questions. So I'd like to put the motion that we go ahead with the debt drawdown. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Mayhem. And in speaking to this motion, I think it's been very instructive, informative. I hope that we've had the discussion we've just had with Mr. Logie about the quantum of debt. And I note that in line with what Councillor O'Malley's just pointed out, if our revenue goes down by a third, our debt actually goes down by a third as well. So, funnily enough, that's in proportion. I think that's purely coincidental, but it's interesting that it should be so. And so it does keep our debt ceiling as a percentage of revenue in line. And as I previously said, I think it's, well, I think we're doing absolutely the right thing by getting our assets into the best shape feasible at this stage of the piece and spending this extra money and knowing that that debt will be transferred, but it leaves our community in the best possible condition going forward. And I've already made comment on why I think that is so, and recent events certainly reinforce that. So, who are the speakers? Who are my speakers? Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, this is the budget I suppose we're all waiting for, one of them with Three Waters and not knowing what was going to happen, and we still don't really know what's going to happen. But my hope is, and I know it's coming to the last days as far as around, you know, timing wise for Three Waters for us to get out of it or get a better deal, but that the new Minister of Local Government listens to us, hopefully meets us and looks at what we've done, because I agree with everyone around the table that we have done what we think is best for our city, and that is to upgrade our infrastructure. It's cost us a lot of money, but we will get some of that replaced, covered in the debt. However, of course, it means that when they do that, they'll take our assets with it, which really holds a bit of a pain for me to think that we have to do that when and I also feel that we're being penalised for being a good council. How can the government justify Three Waters in a situation like we're in when we're ahead and above some of our works? It just does not make any sense. So the arguments they're making do not stand for our council. And I think certainly there needs to be some sort of exemption for councils that are in a situation like this. If we find that our infrastructure costs get far too high, there should be a system where we could come to government and say, okay, we'll need these things in the next few years. Can we get some, money from government to cover that? And that should be the way that it could operate, because otherwise we're handing over all our assets, we've done all the work, and then our ratepayers are going to subsidise and pay for other councils that haven't done any work. Is that right and fair? No, I don't think it is. And so we've been through the hard times, we've taken a lot of debt, and our councils, our ratepayers have had an increase in their rates to cover those things, and now they're going to get it again when this new entity comes in to subsidise others. People are going to sit down and be irate on this and say this is not fair, and it's correct. It's not fair and it's not reasonable. And, the government needs to listen to that.
We have no further. Deputy Barker.
The paper in front of us is about increasing the debt limit, or increasing the debt to, because we've been, I guess, overachieving on our capital works. And I know that Three Waters is in here, and it's a hugely important and controversial issue, but when we look at paragraph 9, it says this debt will, I'm worried about the word presumably transferred entity D, but we do have to do this work for our community, and we do have to extend the amount of capital that we need to do capital projects, so this is very sensible.
Councillor Vanders.
I want to thank Councillor Walker for pointing out my mistake in saying that we have not had such high interest rates for several generations. And he quite rightly points out that in 2008, with the international financial crisis, we had an equally high official cash rate as what we have now. What I meant to say, and I apologise for that, is that the rate of increase of our interest rates from a very low base from a very long time has never been higher. And that for many generations. That rate of increase has been meteoric. It has come off a long, unprecedented level of very low interest rates, and the trajectory for that interest rate increase is the steepest that we've seen. So it is very frightening. That's what I meant to say, and I thank Councillor Walker for pointing out my mistake. Getting back to this particular issue of the extra $35 million that we're now going to add to the already astronomical increase of $111 million. The majority of this $35 million is required because we have, in the last year or so, decided to massively increase spending on Three Waters. This massive increase in spending on Three Waters, I have voted against right from the start, because Three Waters is being taken from us by this government. The assumption that it will be taken from us is implicit in everything that we've done, and I don't think that assumption is safe. The assumption that we will get this debt funded monies back and that this debt will be taken over by the government is not been explicit. And I point out that even when the government has been explicit about saying what they will do, and we only need to look at the hospital cuts that we are now enduring, there is absolutely no assurance that I see that this massive increase in spending will in any way come back to us or actually reduce our debt. In terms of the idea that we will get $180 million knocked off our debt or taken over when they take over our asset, you need to look at that in terms of they give us $180 million worth of debt reduction, but we give them $1,600 million worth of assets.
Sorry, point of order, please. 25(2)(c) relevance. I was patient with Councillor Houlihan, and as Councillor Barker pointed out, unless I'm looking at the wrong paper, this is a debate on debt drawdown. It's not a debate on Three Waters.
Golly, it's pretty relevant because the debt drawdown is to service Three Waters' debt. You know, it's for Three Waters.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I can just carry on.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to uphold that. I mean, and it has been spoken about in the debate already, or in the questions of debate. So I think it's still on the topic at hand.
So this extra $35 million is largely brought about because of the extra that we're spending on Three Waters, and we're doing it without any ironclad assurance or any assurance that I've seen that we are actually going to get recompensed for that. But if you look at this extra debt, it sits on top of and is driven by a massive amount of undercurrent debt, which is largely a result of the over-delivering on our capital program, as our Chief Executive prefers to call it. Over-delivering on our capital program is, I think, more correctly put as spending money that we never budgeted for, and that on top of a budget that was extremely, I believe, unwise under the financial constraints that the whole world is now going into. As an example, in terms of why would you spend a whole lot of money extra on Three Waters just prior to it being taken over by the government? It's like knowing that your car's going to be stolen and then you're going to rebore it and put a new exhaust system and some new pipes in it, knowing that it's going to go anyway. I don't see any wisdom at all in what has been done. I don't see that there is any benefit to the ratepayers that are paying for this, and with the coming interest rates that are way beyond what we've had since 2008, that's 15 years, we are now going to essentially put ourselves in a position where we are not going to be able to meet future challenges because we simply don't have the money or the headroom to address them.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just bringing everyone back to what we are signing off here. So we're signing off an increase in the debt ceiling, up 35 million. So just a reminder about that, and just also to reflect on what the Chief reminded us of, which was our very wise decision as a council to upgrade our water assets in the face of uncertainty and progress the planning so that this city was well placed as we face the uncertainty of transitioning our Three Waters assets. And no matter what you think about, what any of us think about the Three Waters proposal, we're in the situation we're in. And I certainly still stand by that decision of council to do that planning and do that upgrading. And also just reflecting on the Chief's comment about our building of capacity in the city to enable us to deliver the capital projects, and that was also a very wise decision and wise approach. Because there was criticism previously from perhaps the same people that we weren't delivering our infrastructure projects. We still know there's heaps of work to do in that Three Waters space, and we have had agreement. We've been told about that by Mr. Logie around the transfer of debt, but there's still some work to be done yet around that certainty. And we also know and see that the extra debt ceiling is going to mean that we need to rejig our capital budgets going forward, because, as we all know, there have been huge challenges in the markets and huge changes post-COVID, Ukraine war and so forth. So these are not a surprise at all. And I find the alarmist approaches to this troubling, quite frankly. I think the city's well placed. I think that there have been wise decisions by this council, and we're a whole lot better position than we may have been. And I thank the Chief Financial Officer and the staff for all they have done towards this.
Righto. Councillor Walker.
Councillor O'Malley, don't worry, I'll be very quick, because now that I've been given a green light to talk about Three Waters rather than the debt drawdown, I will be brief. And Councillor Van der Vos should very well know that the work we're doing now in Three Waters is some of the work that's been in the planning for multiple years, sometimes decades actually. You simply just cannot turn the tap off on that work, excuse the pun. His car analogy is quite ridiculous. The reason you would repair that car, knowing at some point it might be taken off you, is that in the meantime, somebody driving that car might die if you don't repair it. Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I completely acknowledge to everybody who's saying that this is about a debt drawdown, but of course it is largely due to the fact that we are doing the Three Waters work, so there is an interrelationship between the two. Why are we so far ahead of our delivery? Because we got ahead of the game. We saw this coming after Havelock North, and there were some of us on the political side that said we wanted activity to happen, and it was met by the staff on the other side. So this city as an entity, both from its governance and its operations side, took the Three Waters reforms very seriously, and that is why we're having this debt drawdown meeting and this item today. Councillor Barks's question about the valuation of the debt transfer is correct, and it's in contentious wording in the current bill in front of us, which is the Water Services Legislation Bill. We raised it in our submission, but yesterday's meeting with DIA indicates that our concerns have probably fallen on good ears, and it has in fact been listened to, and we have every reason now to believe, as good as any certainty without having a contract in place, that in fact the debt will transfer at the time of the asset transfer. Councillor Houlihan's questions around capital spend and should we be doing it before this entity, if it does, I'm still hoping it may not, take the asset away and transfer it over. She's quite correct. When Tasmanian Water was done, it was the small basket case councils, and we have a few basket case councils in the Otago region who are influencing the political environment around us. Those councils were the ones that did receive the money first, and so the capital upgrades and investment did in fact go to the underinvested councils first. All the more reason for us to have done these capital works programs now, because if we anticipate that that's what's going to happen, then we would have been waiting longer. Councillor Van der Vos always finds me amusing. So I just want to talk about the transfer of debt and his car analogy. I've never seen an analogy so far off the mark. The fact of the matter is we have just clarified in yesterday's meeting, and we raised it over and over and over again during the submissions on these bills. When the asset transfers, we want to make sure all the debt that we are voting on today transfers with it. We got assurances yesterday that it will. So the analogy that you're spending money on a car and not getting it back later is completely incorrect. The analogy would be you spend money on a car and apparently it goes on the ticket price when the car gets transferred over. We are not selling our asset for the debt. The asset is being taken and transferred away from us. With that asset, there is debt associated with it, and that debt will transfer away with us too. So remember, as we talk about this, we seem to be talking across purposes quite often. But I do want to talk about the impact on the household, and I know it's not entirely related to today's thing, but it does matter. The question I ask is, what is our credit rating? Your credit rating affects your interest, and that affects the household costs later when you receive a water bill. This debt will transfer from a credit rating that is at least A- over to a credit rating that's likely to be double B+. Because the new entities have no assets that can be realisable. All their assets are unrealisable assets, and the general feeling is that they will not get a high Standards & Poor's rating. That means they will get a higher interest rate. That means that the household cost will go up when this moves forward. Now that's just an aside to this item. This item is, should we carry on with our program? I think we should, regardless. If it doesn't transfer over, we're simply doing good management of our own assets. If it does transfer over, then in fact we have managed to get capital works done that if we had not done this, probably wouldn't have been done for 10 to 15 years into the future. Either way you look at it, it's good fiscal responsible behaviour to do this, and I believe that this debt drawdown is a response to what we need to do when it comes to protecting and looking after our assets and looking after our ratepayers and the householders. Thank you.
Alrighty. So, in replying to the various debates I've heard, I'd like to agree with Councillor Vandervis. And especially when it comes to in particular, regarding the car analogy. Because our Three Waters our Three Waters assets are like a car, and we are driving in that car right now, and we are paying the bills for the car, and we have that car on tick. On hire purchase, we have quite a lot of debt in that car. The government is going to leave us with their car, but is going to take over the hire purchase and take our payments. Now, to me, it makes really good sense, given that if this is the car we're going to be travelling in for the next foreseeable future, that we do it up, add that to the tick, and the government takes that over. They're going to change our payments to whatever they want, but that is going to be evened out and averaged out across various other councils throughout, maybe the region, maybe most of the South Island, maybe some other area. But the government is going to decide what we have to pay, and they will transfer that debt away. So if we do up the car before, and put it on tick so the government takes that over, that gives us a better and more reliable vehicle going forward. It's in better shape to carry us into the future. If we let it get really run down because, we don't want to spend any more money because we're losing the debt on the asset anyway, and we're not going to own it anymore, we're putting ourselves in a worse position, because then we're just in the randomised pecking order of all of the councils that want their assets done up. By having ours done up, we may not be at the top of the pecking order, or or say at the bottom of the heap, the ones that are in most desperate need, but we're in a much better position for future travel, because our car is in better shape going forward. So, having said that, so I think we're doing the right thing here. And so having said that, I'll put the motion. I think we should put it by division.
I need to know, is it Morris Minor or a Maserati?
It's none of my, it's a very good, it's a very good practical vehicle, a Land Cruiser. Solid. Anyway, so we'll put it by division. Over to you, Lynn.
Councillor Eck.
Aye.
Councillor Barker.
Aye.
Councillor Benson Pope.
Aye.
Councillor Garrett.
Aye.
Councillor Gilbert.
Aye.
Councillor Houlihan.
Aye.
Councillor Luckett.
Aye.
Councillor Mayhem.
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis.
No.
Councillor Walker.
Aye.
Councillor Weatherall.
Aye.
Aye.
Carried 12-1.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to extend particular thanks to Chair of Audit and Risk, Mr. Warren Allen. Thank you for staying with the meeting throughout, in case there are any further questions, but I'm sure you probably found it equally interesting. Thank you very much for your attendance today. From Perth, yes, thank you. And there endeth the meeting. And so, thank you all. Absolutely. I think we'll need a break.
Mr. Mayor, you may want to acknowledge that belated apology from Councillor Lafiso.
Yes, we did get a belated apology from Councillor Fiso, which we'll put into the minutes. She is unwell. So where are we at? 22? Well, good. For the interests of simplicity, let's start at 11 o'clock.